The Rams could have a very difficult schedule in 2023, but could that be a good thing? That's coming up on Locked On Rams.
You are Locked On Rams, your daily Los Angeles Rams podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Ramily? Thank you for making Locked On Rams your first listen every single day, free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We are also available on YouTube. If you're new to the channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, smash that like button, and also drop your Rams comments down below. My name is Doug McCain. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at DMac_LA. I cover the Dodgers for Dodgers Nation. I've been repping the Rams since they returned to LA. I've been loyal to the soil, always repping my LA teams. And of course, that man to your left is Mr. Travis Rogers. He's the Rams pre-half and post-game show host, entering his 8th season covering the team for ESPN 710. You can follow him at Travis Rogers. Trav, you ready to talk the schedule, my man?
I am ready, and of course, today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp.
Yeah, today's episode brought to you by BetterHelp. We're going to get into it because I love talking about the schedule because you see the internet, the Rams fans all over, they look at this schedule, and it's all predicated on last year's results. But if you look at the schedule and you kind of take it with a grain of salt, the 2022 wins and loss records for the Rams, they face the 9th hardest schedule in the league when it comes to past wins. The Rams' 2023 opponents went 152 and 133 and 3. 7 of them made the 2022 playoffs. The Niners, the Seahawks, Ravens, Bengals, Eagles, Cowboys, and Giants. If you look at the home slate, they got home games against the Seahawks, Niners, Cardinals, Eagles, Commanders, Saints, Browns, and Steelers. The away games, Seahawks, Niners, Cardinals, Cowboys, Giants, Packers, Ravens, Bengals, Colts. Travis, anything stick out to you just as far as how the schedule's laid out?
Well, I think what's interesting is that the NFL has done a thing that every other league I think would be incredibly envious of, which is just announcing the order in which the games are going to be played becomes an event for this league. There, the NBA doesn't say, "Oh, you got the Warriors here, you got the Lakers there." It is an extraordinary testament to how much we care about this league, that the order of the games. We've known who it's going to be for a while. We're just waiting to see the order in which it's going to come. But yes, I think that the Rams have a very challenging schedule simply because of the rotations of the things that have come up. Obviously, you got your divisional schedule. Those 6 games, you're going to have them every single year, right? You're going to have your 3 road games against your division, your 3 home games against your division. The division, I think, is probably a little top heavy with San Francisco this year. I think San Francisco and Seattle, or excuse me, Arizona and Seattle will probably be more gettable than they've been over the last couple of years. But when you look at just who they're going to play, they got the NFC East. The NFC East is a monster. They just put 3 teams, like you just said, in the playoffs last year with the New York Giants, with the Dallas Cowboys, and of course with the NFC champion Philadelphia Eagles. So just that draw alone, and then you get the AFC North as well in that very same draw, another division with arguably 3 very good teams, maybe even a 4th team in Cleveland if they can ever get their together. That this is a very difficult situation for the Rams, despite the fact that they finish in 3rd place and you get the proverbial 3rd place schedule, not when you get the AFC North and not when you get the NFC East.
Yeah, I mean, these are done in advance. And this year, like you said, they're playing the AFC North, the NFC East. You're going to have some long road trips. Last year, they went to the East 1 time. This year, they're going to be playing in the Eastern time zone 4 times: Giants, Ravens, Colts, and Bengals. And yes, the effects of jet lag are real. And this team is going to face some tough competition. There's no question about that. But look, we saw in 2021, the McVay era team. That was the team in the McVay era that traveled the East more than any of them. They went on to win the Super Bowl. So look, the reality is good teams win football games. Doesn't matter if it's on the East Coast or the West Coast. It is more challenging to go to the East because you lose those hours. But I'm also looking at those road games. The Rams will go to Dallas. They'll face that team coming off a 12-5 season. We know Jerry's World, that could be a fireworks show with, if the Rams get it together, could be 2 of the better offenses in the league. And then the Giants, they were 9-7 last year. They went to the playoffs. I mean, you go to Lambeau Field, it feels like they're going to Lambeau every single year. Hopefully that game is earlier in the season. You got the Ravens coming off a 10-7 season. The Colts, that to me is kind of the gimme from the AFC there. And then I'm looking at that Super Bowl rematch against that 12-4 Bengals team last year, and the fact that, hey, they want to get revenge for Super Bowl 56. And
Sure.
also, when will that game be played? If it's later in the year, when it's colder in Cincinnati. So I think that's kind of one of the big factor here is we know the opponents. We just don't know when these games will be played. And with some of these East Coast games, with some of these games that could be in colder temperatures, and that to me is kind of what I'm looking for first when we get this schedule released.
Yeah, Doug, I think you're right. I think that when do you go to Green Bay? When do you go to New York? When do you go to those eastern markets like you're talking about? Because if you're playing them in September and October and maybe even the early part of November, not a big deal other than the fact that you got to travel a little bit. And as you mentioned, the Rams travel pretty well. Oddly, the Rams have been a better road team than they've been a home team under Sean McVay. They've been, now, don't get it too twisted because they've just been good, right? They've been winning everywhere that they go, whether it's at the Coliseum, whether it's been at SoFi, wherever it's been. They've just been a good team when they've been playing, but they've kind of got a good secret sauce when it comes to road trips. They know how to get in and out. They're getting up for those games. They've been very good when they have to go to the Eastern time zones. The weather, though, on the other hand, I think is a much bigger factor when we're talking about this because, like you mentioned, it seems like since the Rams came back to Los Angeles, they've played the Packers every single year in Lambeau late in the year. That's just been the overwhelming cycle of this thing. Now, maybe that's a little bit different this year because it is an Aaron Rodgers. It's going to be Jordan Love. Maybe that game is slightly more gettable than it's been in the past, but I think you're right. I think that when you go is far more important than the fact that you have to go at all because you get that game late November, you get it in December, maybe one of those first couple of weeks in January where you're still playing. Those games go from difficult games to incredibly difficult games because the Rams play in Los Angeles when it's 70 degrees in January.
Yeah, exactly. They are always playing in warm weather, but still, this is a team that I think when you look at it, it's fun. I kind of want to go back to what you talked about earlier, that how this is already an event for the National Football League. We are so starving for NFL content that after the draft, this is kind of what you look forward to. And the reality is, you just never know. I mean, imagine teams last year that saw the Rams on their schedule coming off a Super Bowl win. That Rams team was projected to win anywhere from 10 to 11 games. They ended up winning 5
Right.
games. So, look, you just never know. We have no idea how good these teams are going to be. Some teams that were good last year are going to be bad this year. Some teams that were bad last year are going to be good this year. So it's just kind of the same thing right there in vice versa. So you're going to have some disappointments. But yeah, I think really the big takeaway is you're playing that NFC East, you're playing that AFC North, and there could be some challenging home games. And we're going to talk about this in the next segment coming up is the primetime games. And there's some primetime games that could be potentially at home against some opponents that could fill SoFi Stadium. So we're going to talk about that coming up. How many primetime games will the Rams have in 2023? That's coming up next on Locked On Rams.
Today's episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. And really take a minute and think about how much time you spend on yourself on any given day, in any given week, in any given month, right? Versus how much time you spend on other people. Maybe you've got a family, you're in a relationship, you're taking care of your parents, whatever it might be, right? How do you balance those two things? Because it's incredibly easy to get caught up in what everyone else needs from you and never take a moment to think about what you need from yourself. How do I take care of myself? How do I help myself be better at doing the things that I need to do for other people? And therapy can give you the tools to find more balance in your life so you can keep supporting others without leaving yourself behind, right? It's incredibly helpful to learn positive coping skills and how to set boundaries. It empowers you to be the best version of yourself. It's not just for people who've experienced a major trauma in their life. It can be just to help you get through your days, your weeks, your month, and make you a better version of yourself. So if you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. And you just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist. And if you don't click with that therapist, you can switch at any time for no additional charge. Find more balance with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off of your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon.
And we're back here on Locked On Rams. And next, we're going to talk about how many primetime games will the Rams have in 2023. Because, Travis, this team, this franchise has been a lock to play in the primetime, to get those Sunday night football games, Monday night football games for the past few seasons. But this year could be a little different. They're not favored to make it to the Super Bowl. They're not favored to they're not even expected to make the playoffs this year. It's definitely a transition year. But still, it's the LA market. There's still a lot of stars on this team. And from 2016 to 2022, the Rams have had 29 scheduled primetime games. That's the 8th most in the NFL. Last year, they were scheduled for 5. Of course, the Week 17 game between the Chargers and the Rams, that was flexed out. But do you think there are going to get a lot of primetime games compared to last year, or do you think we might only see maybe 2 or 3?
Well, it's funny, Doug, because I by my count, as somebody who does all these games every single season, I gave them 6 last year because I know while it technically was not a primetime game, that they got a standalone game on Christmas Day against the Denver Broncos where they were the only game going on. I'm putting that in their ledger. I'm giving them 6 on the schedule last year. They got, like you mentioned, they got flexed out of that final game against the Chargers, thankfully. So we didn't have to have them front and center all over the time. But I think that obviously it's going to be dialed back. I think that what you're probably going to see is the Rams will get a Sunday night. They're going to get a Monday night. And I wouldn't be shocked if they got thrown in on a Thursday night as well. I think 3 is the right number. And when you look at their schedule, you got to kind of take 2 things in mind. You need a really good game, first of all, right? You want to see them play against a quality opponent. And you'd like to showcase SoFi Stadium, that while it has been here for a little bit, there are still incredible visuals that come along with being inside SoFi Stadium. I don't care if it's Al Michaels or it's Mike Tirico or anybody that's calling these national games, Joe Buck. They still say this is the best football stadium that we go into every single year. So showcasing SoFi Stadium, for those of you that are watching us on YouTube, you see Doug's background. It still has that unbelievable pop when you see it that is incredible. So when you kind of look at their schedule, I think there's a handful of games that kind of jump out at you as possibilities of being national games. You mentioned it at the top, Doug. In Cincinnati, a rematch of a Super Bowl from a couple of years ago. You've got a Cincinnati team that I think has very high expectations. You've got arguably one of the biggest stars in the league in Joe Burrow playing there. I think that could be an interesting game that the Rams could put on national television. The Dallas Cowboys, I think, play all of their games in a primetime slot. So you always have to consider the Cowboys as an opportunity to do it right there. And then I'm going by memory here. I haven't looked this up exactly, Doug, but I don't know if the Rams and the 49ers have not had a primetime game against one another since the Rams have come back to Los Angeles. So I would expect that the Rams and the Niners find their way in there as well. I don't know where you go Sunday, Thursday, Monday, but I think that the Rams get at least 3. And while you're right, they did have a terrible year last year with just 5 wins. It is still a very sexy brand. It is a very sexy city in a brand new stadium. And I think that the networks very much like putting the Rams on TV.
Yeah, and as someone who clearly I live in SoFi Stadium, I stayed in here after the Rams Chargers game. I just changed the field back, even though it's a away game. Yes, you're absolutely right. This is a football cathedral. This is a stadium costs over $5 billion. Some people say it costs close to $9 billion at the end of the day. And yes, the NFL, they want to showcase that they have this stadium. They also have a franchise in Los Angeles. They love to cut to that B-roll where they're showing the Santa Monica Pier, they're showing the beach, they're showing Hollywood. They love that on Sunday night football. I absolutely think that is a factor. And also, you want LA to be relevant. You want this Rams team to continue to ascend. And look, the bottom line is you still have stars on this team. You have Aaron Donald. You have Matthew Stafford. You have a superstar head coach in Sean McVay. You have Cooper Kupp. So there is still a lot to like with this team. And I think if you do see them get more primetime games or Thursday night football games early on, I think you probably see it front loaded versus back loaded where they might kind of have to flex it out. But I'm going to go down and talk about some games, and I want to get your take on this. I'm going to try to make the case for some of these primetime games, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong, starting with that Bengals game. So it's an away game, and it's a rematch of Super Bowl 56. The Bengals are still one of the best teams in the NFL. The Rams, we talked about it. They're in the remodel. They're transitioning. But that game was played in SoFi Stadium, okay? This game will be played in Cincinnati. It will be a raucous crowd. They'll want to get some revenge. I think you could see that earlier than later. I see that as a potential Monday night football game. What do you think about that Bengals-Rams game?
I think that's a really good pick. If I had to pick one or two games on the schedule, that is the one that's probably at the top of my list for a likely Sunday or Monday night. That feels like a really good spot for them for all the reasons that you mentioned. I think that the Rams may be kind of on the back end of this. That when you look at it last season, the Rams were the draw. The reason that they were in prime time is because they were the defending Super Bowl champions, so they're going to get a lot of attention. I think when they get these games moving forward for this particular season, they're the back end of this, right? The Bengals are the draw on a Monday night football game. The Bengals are the draw on a Sunday night football game. The Cowboys or the 49ers. These are the teams that I think are potential Super Bowl candidates, and the Rams make a good opponent. Whereas last year, the Rams were the marquee team. I think that in this particular situation, they're team number 2.
Yeah, I think that definitely is one that has some sizzle to it. We'll go down some more. You talked about the 49ers, natural, of course, division rival. It's the rivalry between the Niners and the Rams. You're always seeing them playing primetime games. And also, too, the Niners have owned the Rams in the regular season. We also know the Rams beat them when it mattered most, when they were trailing 17-7, the NFC Championship game, and they come all the way back. I think the Steelers is an interesting one as well. The Steelers aren't really the Steelers that they've been in recent years, but another rematch. You got the rematch of Super Bowl 14. The Rams were up 19-17 in the fourth quarter there. I know my older Rams fans, they're going to think about that, want to get some revenge there. Matchup-wise, Aaron Donald versus T.J. Watt. You got two of the best coaches in the league, two of the brand names in McVay versus Tomlinson. Rams have a winning record against the Steelers all time, 15-9-2, and they haven't beaten them since 2003. I think that one's an interesting one because it's in SoFi. You're going to see some terrible towels. And I think, too, if you're the National Football League, you like that. You like the fact that you can sell LA as an attraction. And that's another reason, going back to your point earlier, is you play those games on Sunday Night Football, Monday night, and Thursday night potentially because you tell the league, hey, go to LA, have a vacation there, watch your team in LA. It's definitely an attraction. But one I think that I pretty much is a lock for me for a Thursday Night Football game, Travis, is the Seattle Seahawks. Now, Seattle, they're not favorites to go to the Super Bowl or anything like that. But we know when these two teams play, it's always going to be a tightly competitive, hotly contested game. Last year, of course, they win in overtime with the field goal kick. The Seahawks, they won on the last drive a few weeks prior to that. And you got Carroll versus McVay. And also, too, after week 5 last year, when the Broncos played the Colts, in which was one of the games in NFL history. I actually watched the highlights yesterday for some strange reason. I feel bad for the editor. They had to put 13 minutes of highlights together for that game. No touchdowns in 68 minutes. So that's one thing I think about for the NFL. Who's going to put a competitive game together on a Thursday night? We know the Rams and the Seahawks, they have the potential to do that. So I think that's the Thursday night game. What are your thoughts, though, on the Eagles? Last 2 NFC champions. You got the Eagles coming to town. We know the Super Bowl hangover is real. We saw that in LA. Do you think the Eagles could be a potential primetime game, maybe Sunday Night Football early in the year?
I think the Eagles are a great pick because of the reason I mentioned before. They're the defending NFC champion. They've got the MVP of the league on their team in Jalen Hurts. It's very, very likely that they're going to be one of the best teams in the NFC again, and they're in the East. Like this is the thing. They like putting those big Eastern markets on national television. That's kind of driving the numbers along the way. That whereas a team like Seattle would maybe give you a better game, like you mentioned, the Rams and the Seahawks always play tight games. Whether both teams are good, both teams are bad, one's good and the other's bad, it almost doesn't matter. You put those two teams together, the games are always competitive. But a game in Seattle, maybe not is going to draw that number that they're looking for in the East. A Philadelphia Eagles game, a New York Giants game always seems to kind of draw those numbers. So I think that's pretty interesting along the way. I do love that you brought up the Broncos and the Colts because that may have been one of my favorite games ever to watch because I didn't think NFL teams could be that bad, much less two of them be that bad at the exact same time. That you had Al Michaels openly mocking the play on the field was one of the highlights of the year for me last year. Maybe it was just because the Rams weren't very good either, and misery loves company, but that was one of my all-time favorite primetime games. I couldn't tear my eyes away from it.
Yeah, mad respect to anyone who watched that game in its entirety. I knew when Broncos fans were leaving that game in overtime, that pretty much told you everything you needed to know about the game. It's kind of turned to a cult classic, though. It's one of those movies. It's like it's so bad it's good type movies. I I kind of think fondly of it. But yeah, I think my guess, I'm going 3 primetime games for the Rams. I think you got 3. I think Eagles, Bengals, and I think Seattle. I think Seattle, I think on its Thursday night football game. I think too, I think you could be absolutely right too. I think they could throw 49ers Rams in a primetime game. But I wouldn't
Don't
be shocked too if they go over that 3 because of the other variables that we mentioned, the sexy
don't sleep on
market
the
in LA.
Cowboys.
Cowboys too.
Cowboys, the Cowboys are always on national TV or primetime TV, and if the Rams catch a Thanksgiving, or the Rams catch who knows what it may be, but when you got the Cowboys on your schedule, you can always have a heads up that you might get a primetime game.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely correct. I think you could see Cowboys Rams like we saw a few years ago. That to me feels like it could be like a Sunday game of the week, kind of an
Yeah.
afternoon start, because I
Yep.
think entertainment wise, could have 2 of the most explosive offenses. You got Micah Parsons versus Aaron Donald. We know that Jerry Jones, he was instrumental in helping the Rams get to LA. So there's that connection as
Just
well.
ask him. He'll tell you.
Yeah,
He'll
he's
happily sing that song.
he pretty much claims our 2021 title at this point, right? As a
Just
Cowboys
about.
title. But yeah, look,
Just
we're gonna
about.
get a lot of Rams games no matter what. But prime time, I'm hoping to see at least 3, hopefully more. And next, though, coming up on Locked On Rams, they do have a very difficult schedule potentially, but could that be a good thing for what the Rams are trying to accomplish this year? That's coming up on Locked On Rams.
Thanks again for making Locked On Rams your first listen every single day. And for all you everydayers out there, thank you, for doing that. We love knowing that you're coming in every single day. And tomorrow on the show, we're going to see if the Rams may be able to unlock that explosive offense from a couple of years ago. Can they get it back after a very disappointing 2022 season? That's coming up on the next edition of Locked On Rams.
And welcome back to Locked On Rams, free and available wherever you get your podcast. Shout out to our everydayers. And next, we're going to talk about, Travis, yes, this schedule, the way it's lined up, the 9th most difficult schedule potentially in the league. Could that be a good thing if the Rams are trying to possibly transition, try to develop some of these young players, and maybe get themselves a top 5 pick in 2024? Do you think there's a chance where, hey, yes, it's a difficult schedule, but if you lose a lot of games, you could enter the Caleb Williams sweepstakes and try to go for a top pick of the draft? Do you think there's a world where, hey, if you lose a lot of games this year, the schedule kind of helps you in that sense?
I think we saw it last year. They kind of stumbled into it on accident a year ago, and this may be done with more pre-thought, right? That depending on how this shakes out, and like we've talked about with who they're going to play, what we're waiting for is to find out the order in which they play. But and it's usually scheduled, fairly evenly between your more competitive teams and the less competitive teams along the way. But if you get a draw where you have Cincinnati, Dallas, Seattle, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, the Giants, San Francisco, Green Bay, and you get of those 7 or 8 teams that I just mentioned, if you have 4 or 5 of those in the first 8 or 9 weeks of the season, you could be looking at a record that through, the end of September, you could be 1-4. You could be 2-5 in the middle of October. And I think that could kind of inform how they go about attacking the rest of their season. We saw what happened last year when they started off the way that they did. They got beat in the opener. They win the next one. They didn't look very good doing it, but they did win it. They get to 2-2, and you're thinking, all right. And then they go into the bye and they lose, and they come out and they lose, and they lose, and they lose. And they had a little 6-game skid along the way. And at that point, guys started dropping like flies, and there was just the understanding that what are we here for at this point? If we're not going to go to the playoffs, then you start thinking about the other things that you can gain. And obviously that means draft position. This is a different draft for the Rams that's coming up in 2024 than it's been going all the way back to 2016 with Jared Goff, where they actually have their top pick available to them. They will have some other assets where if they don't land in the very top, maybe they can move into the number 1 position if it's Caleb Williams. You've mentioned Marvin Harrison Jr. a couple of times, which I think is a very interesting pick as well. But they have flexibility that they haven't had in a while. They may just be bad no matter what they try and do. And if you get a very difficult run through the first month or 2 of the season, you could see an interesting strategy through the last month or 2 of the season trying to determine their draft position.
Yeah, no, I think there's I think that's absolutely correct. I think that you might be just bad because you're just bad. It's not like you're trying to be bad.
Right.
It's the fact that, look, you signed 26 UDFAs. You made 14 picks in the draft. That's 40 rookies in the league. And I think it's a necessary evil. I think that if you even hit on 5 or 6 of these rookies, that is going
Sure.
to help you in the future build a Super Bowl winning team. So I think they are willing to go through those growing pains and willing to make this effort to just find this young talent to see if it can flourish and to see if they have some dudes in the future. But also, too, I think, look, you look at next season, you look at the picks that are available. Everyone talks about Caleb Williams. It does make a lot of sense because he's a quarterback. And we know that quarterback, that's the most important position in sports, not even just football. And two, I think the roots of having a USC guy, a Trojan, a guy
Couldn't
that, and
agree
I'm a
more.
UCLA guy. I'm a UCLA guy, but still, look, man,
Yeah.
I'm low to the soil. I'll
Couldn't
rep the
agree more.
Rams no matter what. And you put on those colors that you're my guy. And I think just the fact that I think this franchise, they realized that, like I said, one Super Bowl was fantastic. They accomplished the goal, but now it's what do you do next, right? You have to win another Super Bowl. And I think they realized that to not only win a Super Bowl, but to just build fans for generations, you need that one guy that you can grow with. I mean, Tom Brady and the Patriots. How many Patriots jerseys do you see? Russell Wilson with the Seahawks. They kind of found their guy younger, and then
Yep.
that was who they represented and really just came to see. He put butts in the seat. So if you could get a Caleb Williams, one of the most exciting players in college football, one of the most dynamic players that also brings that star power. I mean, you see the Heisman pose, he
Yep.
paints his nails. He has those intangible qualities that I think will play up as well. And I think they are considering that as well. Not just can we win the future, but who do we win with that can further endear himself to this fan base? But yeah, I definitely think that it's going to be more a byproduct of just having a bad team. But I still think you got Sean McVay. You have championships on this team. You want to stay relevant in LA. Look what the Seahawks did last year. I mean, the Seahawks, no one expected them to do anything, and they put together a pretty nice season. So you just never know. I think the first 5 to 6 games are going to tell us everything we need to know about this season. And if they get off to a great start, I think you have to kind of do what's best for your franchise and try to possibly win games. But I think that the silver lining in all this is if they do play bad, it could help this team down the road.
I think you hit on something incredibly important there, and that is if the opposite of what we're talking about happens. Let's say you get the Colts and you get the Saints and you get some of these other teams in the early part of your schedule. Let's say you get Arizona maybe early in the year, a team that you've had a great deal of success with historically. Maybe you get Seattle and they are more like the team that we thought they would be a year ago with Geno Smith. And you get to the end of October and you look around and you're 5-2, 5-3, and you're in a really good spot. You might get tricked into thinking that there's a path there that doesn't actually exist. And now you are trying to acquire, and now you're pushing a little bit and trying to see, knowing that the back end of this gets much more challenging. It's not unlike what happened to Seattle last year, like you mentioned. They got off to this really good start, and it's like, is this real or not? And then as you got closer to the end of the season, it was a lot less real than we might have thought at the beginning of the year. Now, they're in a slightly different situation because they had Denver's high pick already, number 5, so they could kind of have the best of both worlds simultaneously. But I do think that Sean McVay, I do think that Les Snead, I think that the Rams are very aware of where they are in the hierarchy of the NFL. And even if they get off to a good start, I agree with you. You got to go for it because this is the NFL and who knows what happens. But that could be an oddly weird position for them to be in if they do get off to a good start, but haven't played the lion's share of the good teams on their schedule. And the talent level on the Rams this year could land them in the worst spot that there is in the NFL, which is right in the middle of the pack. That's where you don't want to be the 14th best team in this league. You want to be 29 and up or 1 or 2. Those are the spots that you want to be. Those are the good spots. That middle is no man's land, and they need to be aware of that.
Yeah, no, I agree wholeheartedly. I think it also is a dangerous game too in LA. I mean, if you got the Steelers and the Eagles and they're just saying whose house, I mean, you don't want to hear people yelling Steelers house or anything like that. So I think from an optic standpoint, I just don't love the reputation. I want to continue to build. But yeah,
Yes.
next episode, we're going to talk about the explosive passing game and how it can return to this Rams offense. But that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Rams. That guy to your left is Mr. Travis Rogers. You can follow him at Travis Rogers. My name is Doug McCain. Friends call me DMAC. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at DMAC_LA. And until next time, whose house? It's Locked On Rams house.